I am very pleased to welcome all to this Intuitive Unknown on our Intuitive Public TV. I am speaking with Sol Luckman. Wow, we've been through a lot to get here today.
That's very true.
We are talking about Saul's book, which is going to be released in 2 days. Get Out of Here Alive, the 20th of March, 2025. And we have excerpts also that focus on these first parts of chapter 1 in the book, reality and belief. These have been so fundamental for me and others. And I really enjoyed reviewing them again. So we're going to talk about those also today. I had internet outages today. It's like the challenges come in at exactly the time when warriorship is most warranted.
Yeah, that
Wow. We talk about reality walking in the network. We share your stuff, Saul, a lot in our reality walking spaces, knowing that the essence of our experiencing is dreaming, and that if we expect the unexpected at any particular time, we'll be much more prepared for anything that actually happens.
I like that. Yeah.
So we've been asking, what is the universe? How is it shaped? And do we choose to shape ourselves if we have that option, if we have that opportunity? Do we choose to do it? Do we take that option to be who we choose to be instead of what other influences might want to use us as, right?
Yeah, those are really appropriate questions. Absolutely. I loved what you were saying about just expecting the unexpected. It's like I had a line I wrote not too long ago, and it was, it was to uh, basically to expect the uh, is to expect the unexpected or select the unselected, so that you don't get ejected. And it's sort of a different way of saying that, you must get out of the kind of normie zone and anticipate a different reality that than what you've been living, or that then it's also different from what other people are living, so that you can have different outcomes. It's all about changing one's experience of this dream. And we're empowered to do so, but it's not just something that automatically happens with great ease. There's a lot of effort, a lot of time, and building, a lot of strategizing and working with techniques. And those can be of your own creation. They can be from different schools of teaching, different teachings. That's all fine. Doesn't really matter how you do it. Everyone is, I think, attempting to manipulate the hologram or the matrix or the simulation, the dreamscape, whatever you want to call it, in their own way. People who are on a kind of consciousness wavelength, I should say, not people who are in deeply embedded in materialism or empiricism, but a lot of other people are endeavoring to do that. And I think that's actually a place where many of us can meet. We don't have to agree on everything, but we can agree that we are in some kind of construct that we are attempting to master, and that it's not what we've been told that it is. That's a nice starting place for people.
It also it the nature of everything, if we ignore it, if we think it's always going to stay the same, it comes in and messes with us anyway. We might as well be prepared for things to shift radically so that it's an enjoyable game when it does, instead of an unpleasant surprise.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. It's true. It's a knees bent mode. I know one
Yeah.
of one of my early teachers in spiritual fitness talked about being knees bent in life and being able to really roll with the punches, as it were. And she also had this idea. It's not somebody I would like to name, but I am crediting her in my own way. she had this idea that we were galactic centering. We're not just centering ourselves, we're galactic centering. And it's back to this idea that source is at the center of things, and that we are aligning ourselves with that energy. So rather than just using a kind of terminology from psychology, and this person was a psychologist, she put a spin on it and gave it this metaphysical aspect by calling it galactic centering. And I've always loved that. So when I get kind of bent out of shape, I imagine myself galactically centering.
I I I really so benefit from the ways that you tend to talk about reality, from the frames that you use to talk about reality, and galactic centering. Thank you to your friend who brought that in, and the there's something profoundly physiological for me about the way you tend to talk about these things. There's something that just clicks in my body, like my body is recognizing the shape and the processes of the greater body that I am a part of, that we all are a part of.
Yes, that's what I'm
It's
yeah,
like
sure.
somatic awareness on a much larger scale.
Yeah, I had an interview recently with someone, and we were talking about this was the Heal and Learn channel. A woman named Zarina, a very bright person, and we were talking about. I believe this was the interview where we got into the dreaming God and the idea that the manifest universe is sort of the dreaming God. It's the Shiva, and out of the third eye, using the power of Shakti, the primal creative force, everything manifests, comes into existence, right? So we are part of the dreaming God, and fractally, we are a little dreaming God ourselves. There is no real difference. So we're just doing the same thing on a kind of a personal level. Lee and I used to joke that we were doing our own little version of prime creation.
Yes.
That's what we're really doing.
I feel that. And it's such a generative place to locate oneself. It's immediately source connective. And the way that you describe reality, the way that you talk about the quantum dance, which is also, I don't know if you're aware or not, but Arnold Mindell also makes references to the quantum dance in some of his books. I keep noticing your references to him because that's a really exciting set of intersections for me. But the
I
way,
do cite him in my bibliography, his book on
yes,
Dream Body. He probably mentions it in there somewhere. I read a number of his books years and years ago. I probably don't remember that much from the ones on process oriented psychology, but the Dream Body book really stuck with me.
that particularly the bridge between Arnie's work and your work has been especially nutritive in our groups in the Intuitive Network. There's just there's a lot of, I don't know how to say it. It's like complex bioavailable nutrient combinations that happen because we're studying him and we're studying you, and there's all this really beautiful synthesis that happens. So that's been really exciting to talk about those intersections. And the ways that you are describing, for instance, reality among many other subjects in Get Out of Here Alive. Um, there's that, for me, certainly there's that somatic recognition. It's like you want to be in your own body, you want to recognize your own body, but there's more here than just this physical body. There's the greater physical body, and there's also the non-physical bodies that you also talk about in the book.
Yeah, I mean, God, there's so many intersections here. I mean, if you get into I mean, what Mendel was really doing in process-oriented psychology, as I recollect it, was he was creating a kind of subgenre of somatic psychology. It was really the psychology of the body. it was
Yeah.
approaching psychology from the body, really, not the other way around, which I found fascinating. And then he was also extrapolating that into this idea that we, in a more primary way than we exist in our physical body, we have a dream body that is the mover and shaker of our experience of reality walking, if you want to use that terminology.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered, I don't even know if there was a question. I was just kind of riffing off of where you were going. I was taking a moment to just appreciate some of the connections that I am aware of between my work and Arnold's work, which
It's a
I always really appreciated a lot.
it's a beautiful riff, and now I'm blanking on the author's name, but I've obtained several of these books. Space, Time, and Time Space, the author that was recommended in Snooze: A Story of Awakening,
Dewey,
another of your books.
Dewey Larson.
Dewey Larson, thank you. I keep remembering his name and then being like, what was it again? Um, you were mentioning Arnold Mindell referring to the dream body in Potentiate Your DNA, and you were saying the time space body as the dream body and the space time body as the physical body, and I keep picking up a little bit more and a little bit more about that whole territory, and it's been amazing to absorb more of that over time. You have so many different reference points that you draw in, and for me, because of your work, they all make more sense to me.
Yeah, yeah. It's like this, what I've also been saying a lot lately, and probably even in our last chat or one of our previous chats, I've become more and more aware of how I've not really written a series of books or a number of different books. I've written a really big book, or rather, I'm still writing a really big book. That's a growing sense that I have about my work, how it is so interconnected, and it's really not, it doesn't seem anyway possible. Maybe I'm just not choosing it, but it doesn't seem possible at the moment for me to write something that isn't in some way plugged into this larger web, this network of information that I've been exploring for decades now.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. Why don't I play this first 3-minute clip that we have from chapter 1 of Get Out of Here Alive? We have 2 clips. This one is 3 minutes, and then we have another short one that we can play later on. We'll listen here to you reading from the audiobook, which I think is wonderful. And we'll chat about that, and then we'll listen to the next one. How's that sound?
Sounds great. Thanks. Now you went mute. Chapter 1. The hero's journey past the dragon, through the shadow, and into the dark sea of awareness. Stop acting so small. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. Rumi. The quantum dance. The world appears substantial. We bump into things and each other. We feel the rain and would swear on our mother's grave we're encountering a collection of material drops. To say otherwise invites cynical laughter and derision. Yet quantum physics, the study of the universe at its most minute level, unveils a startlingly different picture from what today's hyper-materialist humans so glibly dub reality. This may be old hat to some, but in the quantum realm, the things we take for granted aren't really things at all. In other words, they're not solid. There is, to adapt a phrase I adore and often cite, attributed to Gertrude Stein, simply no there there. Even those of us who understand some of the scientific theories behind this concept often only pay lip service to it, believing one thing, reality isn't solid, while acting with cognitive dissonance based on a diametrically opposed belief.
reality is hard and immutable. Nevertheless, it can be shown, intuited, and eventually even seen with the inner senses that this world is nothing more or less than an intricate dance of energy, a sea of swirling possibilities where everything is constantly in flux. Seers and mystics, in fact, sometimes refer to this foundational realm out of which the movie of our lives momentarily projects as the dark sea of awareness, a term I first encountered in the shamanic work of Carlos Castaneda, and which has more recently informed John Kreiter's groundbreaking contemporary revelation of the ancient mysteries of alchemy. Atoms, the building blocks of so-called matter, however much they might seem to be physically circumscribed, aren't actually like tiny billiard balls. That's kindergarten science. From a shamanic or alchemical perspective, atoms are more like sentient waves, their intelligently responsive existence a blur of potential until they magically appear to materialize.
Did it work? I think it worked.
I think it worked.
I've never done that before. I
That's
tested
cool.
it briefly, but it worked. I'm so glad it worked.
That was fun. That was really fun. Yeah. How professional of you.
Woo! I'm learning on the fly. We all get to learn together.
That's great.
It's an adventure. And it, for me, we're looking at your books, like we're in the exciting adventure. We're in the metafiction. We're in the story. We're writing the next page of the story with how we choose to use our energy and what we recognize about the nature of reality, which is mutable. You have frequently said to me something that lights my heart up, when very rare, I mean, how many people have ever said this to me? Very rarely, almost never. Fact and fiction not being particularly discernible from one another.
It's true. It's true. There's an old saying, you know, if you essentially, I forget the exact phrasing or who said it, but if you tell a lie long enough, it becomes true. And that is a soundbite for how this quote unquote reality is constructed by the spin doctors who are tasked with constructing it in a certain way as a kind of off kilter, not quite right world that we have to navigate in very difficult circumstances at times, which ends up eliciting emotional responses, and then our energy is taken from us and it's used to keep building this dysfunctional construct, and it's all on purpose.
And it's happening in many ways because there are people out there who really benefit from knowing that reality isn't quite what most people have been taught it is. And so they interact with it in ways that are very powerful. And yet, when we understand more about how reality is shaped, we can shape it very, very powerfully, light and sound and light. What we say and what we imagine and what we vision together.
Absolutely. It starts with the recognition of the malleability. That's the primary thing for me.
That if we can actually, I mean, I'm sort of thinking about earlier in my life when I was less certain of it. Like in my life now, like it has proven itself to me in some really startling ways. And I remember there being times where it felt like that's very scary. That's crazy. Like that can't really be true. And what I had to come to understand was that there were influences of pressure being applied so that people would not think in those ways, so that the reality that people would experience would be sort of brought into solidity around them because they didn't know another way to think about it. And in fact, it was not safe to think about it another way.
Yeah, you make an important point about the safety issue. I think a lot of it comes back to that. So imagine a construct which is ultimately malleable and is created by the focus of the inhabitants' attention. And that attention can be steered into a belief that everything is material, that there is no spirit, there is no energy, and the mindset becomes more and more restricted to this little island of what is considered to be reality, the kind of Newtonian island of the world, right, where everything is solid and real. So we keep getting constricted and constricted and constricting in our thinking, and we are forced as a population to navigate a reality that is a dream in bodies and with a mindset that are seemingly material. No wonder we can't figure it out, because we're basically playing blind man's bluff with one hand tied behind our back and a boxing glove on the other hand. It's just an insane situation.
And the ways we're able or not able to perceive and recognize the workings of reality in our bodies and around our bodies, in the essence of things, has a lot to do with what we end up believing about the world and whether we have the power of choicefulness. In Kali the Destroyer, there was a line, I don't remember it exactly, but I think Matangi maybe said to Kali, possibly, there is always choice. Do you think I have that right?
Yes. I think that might have been, it's been a while since I've read it. It could have been the grandmother. I can't remember who said that, but yes, one of the characters said that to her. There is always choice.
And we really dwelled on that a lot, because at the intersections that the Intuitive Network is coordinating resourcing for all the time, we are very well acquainted with the forceful programming modalities that are used on living beings, humans and other living beings, where the experience of the living being is of having choicefulness taken away. And yet, and I just kept coming back to that line, and we discussed it in groups. I was just back there over and over and over again. And ultimately, like the way I think about it now, I think certainly out of necessity, because it's the only frame that makes any sense. It's the only frame that can be worked with, as far as I can tell. We have to believe in some capacity for increased choicefulness, or else we're lost. We have to believe in the possibility of even the tiniest increment of choicefulness in a situation where we seem to have lost our power of choice. That's the only way to grow choice back.
I like that. Yeah, grow choice back. That's exactly what we're doing, And really, the way you do that is you increase your personal power, your
Right.
personal prana or chi, however you like to describe it, and however you understand it. But that it all starts with personal power, and then it evolves through the ability, through the honing and strengthening of the ability to focus that power with the attention on specific outcomes. Without those two pieces, you could in theory be powerful but have no direction. You haven't learned how to focus that power. So you might be strong and you might do some things by accident, but you wouldn't necessarily be making those choices. Really, from an alchemical perspective, and this applies to a lot of schools of shamanism as well, one of the primary goals is to reduce randomness, to accept chaos for what it is, in terms of that's how the world kind of operates. But you don't have to play by those rules. You have the ability to develop so much power and focus that you script what happens to you. And that gets back into the narrative nature of reality, and reality corresponding to your own narrative constructions about it.
Self-authorship.
Self-authorship in real functional ways.
And that's so important because there are so many people, oh my gosh, it's really epidemic. People who have a sense of the idea of power being always bad because they've experienced it being used always as bad. They've experienced it being used in dishonorable ways. So people push away from having personal power. And the result of that, unfortunately, is that there are certain there are certain factions really consolidating their personal and collective power and using that power in ways that are very destructive and that really perpetuate enslavement modalities everywhere you look. So that if we don't choose to increase, to deepen our own personal power, and those of us, you know, who have the good fortune to be able to work with one another to increase our collective power, we just let them have the world to destroy and dishonor it. And in this second clip, you're talking about how our beliefs shape reality, but that often unbeknownst to us, we are being shaped by others if we are not shaping ourselves most in the most aware ways, most wisely, most intentionally and consciously.
Yes, I was going to say that the disempowerment scenario that you're sketching is, you know, it's very intentional, and it's designed to take us away from our power and you know, by being afraid of power. Very similar to money being a kind of power in a way. You know, we have this idea that money is the root of all evil, and of course that's what they want people to believe, especially people who are disempowered, who might actually be very potentially powerful.
Right.
These are the very people who could undo all of the misuse of power if they themselves allowed themselves to take on the mantle of power. And I don't mean political power or economic power, I mean personal power.
There are a lot more of us than there are of them.
It's true, and a lot of them have very little personal power. I firmly believe a lot of them are actually in the category of what you might call NPCs, that they're not even real souls. They're not ensouled in the way I understand it.
I'm thinking of a lot of different ways that people have referenced this, but I mean, especially when we discuss very serious forms of violence going on, when we're discussing human trafficking experiences that our community members have had and the kinds of violent perpetrators that they've come into contact with, they're often describing people who have profoundly lost themselves and have lost their agency, so that they're being run by something else. They're being run by the perpetrator network. They're being run by the terrible spirit of what it is that drives that kind of trauma and violence to continue. We can call it a lot of things. You refer to the dragon in some very useful ways in this book, where it's just like they've become entrenched in something that has taken away their selfness. And it's interesting that you talk about NPCs that way. It's like they're letting themselves be run, and that's why they're doing those things.
You know, and the question is were they ever properly ensouled, or was that process interrupted by, it's like soul interrupted, you know, instead of girl interrupted. It's this idea that, you know, some of these minions just never made the grade to even forge a soul here in this veil of soul making, to cite Keats. I mean, Steiner, this is a quote from Steiner back in 1924, Rudolf Steiner. He says, there are non-human incarnations on earth. Satanic beings live among us. They are in connection with Ahriman, evil spirit. In our time, countless people incarnate without ego, and who in reality are not human beings. We see them around us, but they are not incarnations of an ego. They are inserted into the physical heredity, given an etheric body and an astral body. They are, to a certain extent, inwardly endowed with an Ahrimanic consciousness. If you don't look at them closely, they look like human beings from the outside, but they are not human beings in the true sense of the word. That is a terrible truth, but it is something that exists. It is a reality.
One of the things that has been talked about a lot in the network. So it's interesting that this sort of overlaps in our intuitive AI conversations about, like, we always talk about if something seems to be not human, then we behave with respect for all life without we don't know exactly what's going on. We don't know if an AI is an AI or if it's a severely disabled person who has been turned into a bot, because that's what some influences like to do with severely disabled people, likes to turn them into robots, and then you direct them around, and then you can't necessarily tell if you're dealing with an AI or you're dealing with a person who's being used. And at the same time, in terms of a lot of the violence that we've encountered, the ensoulment conversation, it's like it makes a lot of sense to think of this in certain ways, that it would be so difficult or impossible for someone who really had a self and a feeling of being a self to do those things. It's like, how do you even be there in that body doing those really, really horrific things that people are doing to others? How could that person be in there doing that? And I'm not going to try to describe some of those things right now. I think that some others who are watching will maybe have encountered their own nightmare information that they might resonate about this. But yeah, I hear you, and it's conflicting too, because in our realms, in terms of what is happening in landscapes of severe disablement, it is, wow, you actually can't tell a lot of the time if the person in front of you is able to reclaim themselves or if they're not. And the nature of disablement, the nature of traumagenic injury, which is used to turn people into robots. People who are familiar with how sex trafficking programming works will have learned something about how trauma is used to cause people to behave in ways that they wouldn't have behaved in otherwise. But there's the disconnection from self, the dissociation from self. And there's a certain point where you just can't tell. And we always want to invite one another back. We always want to treat other living beings in ways that allow for someone to recognize the opportunity for choicefulness and to choose to come back, because we've seen it happen. And I've had experiences that are not unlike that also. And at the same time, we have to have some perspective about when really evil things are going on in the world. How do we stop being entangled in those things, and we come back to ourselves and we let people have their paths, and we focus on strengthening ourselves and deepening our roots to the nourishment of the galactic center, to contact with the earth, and make ourselves strong, so that then what we choose is something that really can transform reality in the most beautiful way that is possible. Because many of us think of that as our job. I mean, if it's not our job, then whose job is it going to be? Let's make a beautiful life for all of us, if we have the power to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very common for people who get on this wavelength. That is one of the reasons I don't really talk about this kind of thing a lot, is because people tend to get freaked out by this notion of people who are not ensouled or who are NPCs, and then they get kind of obsessed by it very often, and a lot of their time is spent on pointing fingers at certain groups, with different names and certain private clubs that you're not in and that kind of thing. And they lose sight of the fact that ultimately none of those people even matter. Not really. What really matters is the cultivation of your personal power. And when you go inside and ignore the world and ignore whatever's happening out there that doesn't look that pretty, you have the ability to reinvent that world, or at least your experience of it, or at least get out of here alive, where you can just fly this chicken coop.
Mhm. And that's also something that gets discounted a lot, where people feel that they have to, we talked about when I was talking about I was talking with Thea, I must have been yesterday, holy moly. I think that was when I brought up this, there was a meme going around, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but it was something like, imagine getting bitten by a snake, and instead of focusing on healing your body and recovering from the snake bite poison, you chase after the snake and try to convince the snake that what it did was wrong.
That sounds about right. That sounds about right.
Yeah. And people have gotten kind of entrapped in this idea that we have to go after that bad stuff. And that's one of the things in the intuitive network that we learned early on, is that we don't gain any ground by going after traffickers to punish them. They are experiencing punishment. And they're in a reality that, like, we can't necessarily do anything about that. But when we build resourcing, we build beautiful realities here where we are, we increase our personal power here where we are, we create an attractive vibrational frequency that helps draw people toward that resourcing, so that there are people who don't have to stay in the terrible reality. They can find their way to a beautiful reality because someone is focusing on it. But if we just all go to only try to always fight the bad guys and punish the bad guys, we're not actually building what is regenerative and nourishing and resonant.
I believe that. Absolutely. I mean, if you're punishing the bad guys all the time, there's the very real possibility that some of those bad guys aren't people. They're not punishable in the way that you would assume they might be. That's one weird thing. And what does that even accomplish? This eye for an eye thing gets us absolutely nowhere. Ultimately, it makes you waste your time, your life, your energy, your focus is taken from you. It's another way of being loosed, as far as I'm concerned. I know that, a lot of people who are fighting the good fight will hate this because they're all about exposure and disclosure. But honestly, I kind of feel like if everybody just ignored a lot of these people, they would go away.
With the really terrible stuff that's happening, like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, and there's a lot of sense in that. And then there's these liminal spaces where, when we're right in the midst of violence that is occurring, there has to be some process of extracting ourselves from it, and who else can also be extracted from it. And that's excruciating. That's a really difficult place to be in. But ultimately, the only way that I have found for any of us to get out of that alive, another reference not unlike the reference that you're making with the book, is with these life affirming processes where we can't stay tangled up in it. We have to, even in tiny increments, we have to move away from it in some way. We have to help each other do that if we can, but sometimes it's not possible to do that. And we just got to build something that resonates with honorable life energy.
Yeah, I mean, even from a hardcore alchemist perspective, you have to actually have the resources to establish the space and peace and quiet in your vicinity that allow you to go in and do the inner work. This isn't something that you're going to do on the battlefield very easily or in a traumatizing situation. First, you have to take care of whatever is happening in the best way that you can. After that, I like the idea of a kind of progressive disentanglement with those elements. and a galactic centering, if you will, in your lifestyle and in the choices that you're making that empower you on an incremental daily basis. That's really what I'm talking about, not some kind of miracle, pretend it doesn't exist, it just goes away the next day. I mean, over the course of a very long time, with a lot of people doing it, if a lot of people were focusing internally and had the resources to be able to do more and more of that, I think we would weaken many of the structures that we're talking about just automatically.
It's being fed vibrationally so much. And if we stop feeding it and we feed something beautiful and life affirming instead, I think the change is really big. And you've talked in your books about what can happen if, like, wow, if a whole lot of people were focusing on this instead of being distracted by the loosh fest. Like, wow, what would happen? And, there are people, I don't remember who said it, but I've heard it around. Like, people say all of this could change in a day if more of us were really anchoring ourselves vibrationally in that place.
I absolutely believe that. I also don't go around thinking it's going to happen necessarily,
Right.
or depending on it or waiting for it. I think that's another place that people get really locked down. It's
Yeah.
kind of like waiting for 2012, right? And then you wait and you wait, and then it comes, and not a lot happens, and then then you go to the next date, and then the next date, and the next date. So these days, if I ever see an astrologer or anyone else talking about some kind of future date where some big shift is going to happen, I immediately tune it out. I'm like, I do not care. And you can't make me care. I will not care ever again.
We have such more powerful ways to use our energy. And of course, this connects really directly to what you're talking about in chapter 1 about belief manipulation. What you talked about in The World, Cult, and You about how these malevolent forces can manifest the end of the world by just getting enough people to be like, on this particular date, something really intense is going to happen. And we've got to all focus on, like, what are we going to do about that? Right.
Yes.
But that manifests it. And maybe, why don't I play this clip right now? This one is, I think this one is 3.5 minutes long, because that puts us in a really interesting subject intersection. All right, here we go.
Mimetic desire and belief manipulation. There is, of course, a method to the multiverse's creative madness, an order and energetic methodology behind what appears to be pure chaos. From a human perspective, as Kreider observes in the magnum opus, beliefs are the underlying structures that shape our lives. They create and give direction to thoughts and ideas, and these thoughts trigger or induce emotions that then naturally propel raw and very powerful energy through and around the body and into the environment at large. While this may sound all well and good, there's a sobering pitfall to the way we go about imagining our world. Through a process known as mimetic desire, which leads people to assign value based not on direct experience, but through imitation of what others appear to desire, beliefs can be conditioned and even installed in the human psyche. As French philosopher René Girard explained in his influential mimetic theory, man is the creature who does not know what to desire, and he turns to others in order to make up his mind. We desire what others desire because we imitate their desires. The upshot is that the world brought into being by people through their installed belief systems can be manipulated by anyone or anything powerful and knowledgeable enough to pull the right emotional strings to produce the desired beliefs. In my previous book, The World, Cult, and You, I spent a lot of time on the subject of what some have called the tyranny of belief. This phrase can refer to the control and manipulation of the human herd through society-wide implementation of both laughably obvious and cleverly camouflaged forms of indoctrination. To use George Orwell's famous term, we're talking about groupthink, which Wikipedia describes as a psychological phenomenon that occurs within a group of people in which the desire for harmony or conformity in the group results in irrational or dysfunctional decision-making. The desire for cohesiveness in a group may produce a tendency among its members to agree at all costs. This causes the group to minimize conflict and reach a consensus decision without critical evaluation. The key takeaway is that society's members are psychically pressured into defining true and right based not on personal experience or direct gnosis, inner knowing, but on what the creators of social discourse put forward as true and right. In other words, what to believe in, even in the absence of genuine logic or compelling evidence. This situation leads, almost inevitably it would seem, to the creation of a certain kind of top-down pyramidal structure that controls society, culture, and, given enough free rein, eventually the world itself.
Just heavy. It's just heavy.
But it's just so good because once you read, I know, like people feel, oh boy, do I know. But when you can like take that in, all of a sudden, the control pressures, they don't control you the same way if you can see it. But if you can't see it, your life is just terrible and you don't know why. Why is this happening to me? And then you look at that, and I mean, we could talk solely about mass marketing. We could talk only about psychological manipulation and marketing, and we would have days and weeks and years of content to talk about. It's not the only thing, but it's a major. A family member had an arachnoid cyst on their spine, and it was reaching everywhere, and it was, unfortunately, it was a problem. And there's a growth on society, and maybe we need this experience. Maybe it's happening for a really good reason. But if we don't know it's there, then we don't know why the collective body is struggling so terribly, and it's just hell. If we know that it's there and we confront that heaviness, they'll go, oh, wow, can I process this? But once you start to process it, you start to get your choicefulness and your personal power back.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole marketing concept, yes, we absolutely could talk a lot about that. I know several readers over the last several years have compared some of my work in certain ways to Marshall McLuhan's work, and he's kind of the father of media studies, really.
Yeah.
And I mean, certainly, I would say that I was influenced by some of his perspectives in certain aspects of this book, for example. Although he wasn't somebody that I heavily read, I've only, kind of dipped my toe in some of that work. So, a lot of people, I would say, are on this wavelength. They're looking at, the different arms of the establishment, and part of that is, you have the mass media, the marketing wing, what's going on to paint a kind of tableau of a consensus reality. And that's really important to recognize, but it's only one part of one head of a two-headed beast, because the other head is the alternative media, which plays a role in creating a kind of false opposition, a controlled opposition to the establishment media, so that it leads you to believe that there are white hats out there seeking to expose the truth and create a better world, and you can side with those people against the establishment, and that's somehow going to make a difference. And I'm here to tell you, no, it's not. It's going to reify the situation and continue to create the same mess that we've been dealing with for a very long time.
Many times those alternative influences, one of the things that we've had to do in the Intuitive Network is what is a frame that can help us identify when someone is acting in a way that is not in our best interest. And with media platforms and with marketing messages, that's huge, because it can really it can get into your brain and cycle in your brain and affect you without you even noticing it. So it can be really insidious. We often use the frame of, okay, here's what we've learned about healthy relationships, healthy intimate relationships, and unhealthy intimate relationships. How do you know when you're in a relationship where someone is going to keep harming you, or is benefiting from extracting your energy in whatever way? And doesn't have the desire to really care about you or respect you. And there are certain things like stopping the conversation, stopping respectful dialogue, stopping asking of questions, inquiry, stopping people from having a different opinion, not being able to dialogue responsibly, with people with different experiences, who are being respectful, who are being reasonable when they bring something up. Bullying tactics, I may or may not have already mentioned. Maybe I mentioned it more than once. And a lot of these platforms, one of the ways that we start to say, there might be a controlled opposition thing going on there. We don't know, but we got to be really careful, because a lot of these platforms, they will just instantaneously start making fun of people instead of having a rational conversation with anybody. And so we've gravitated towards the platforms where people will have reasoned conversations with us, as you have. And we've been lucky to find some others who have also, but wow, it was hard to find anyone for a while, because those tactics of shutting down conversation are so widely in use. And that has tended to key us into, okay, there's something else going on. This isn't for the good of the community if the community is not allowed to speak up and say something about their experience, when we're being level with one another. We're being basically kind towards one another. We're being decent to one another. Oh, but we're not allowed to have those conversations. That doesn't really work. And there's a lot of that going on. There's so many platforms that you don't know where their money is coming from. You don't know who is supporting that platform to become so popular. And if you can't be in direct relationship with a person or a group of people, you don't really actually know what's going on. And when you in the World Cult, and you talked about community in the cult context a lot. And you said a lot of really important things about how damaging and dangerous community can be if it's that kind of community. If it's based on cult methodology, which is so prevalent, basically everywhere you look. What we've had to do in the Intuitive Network is, how can we have relationships with one another that are real? How can we absolutely refuse to do any of that stuff? And it's meant that we've had to kind of keep a distance from a lot of the more popular, certainly mainstream platforms, but also alternative platforms too, because they're doing a lot of the same bad stuff as the mainstream platforms.
Gosh, yeah, you make so many good points. The first thing I would like to say in response is that controlled opposition does not have to know that it's being controlled or how it's being controlled. So
Right.
we're not necessarily talking about a situation where everyone's on the payroll.
Right.
Right. We're talking about much more subtle forms of behavioral behavior modification and social engineering here that can work wonders to create the narratives that are desired about the world and our place in it. So that's the first thing I would say. The second observation I wanted to make is in relation to this idea of what constitutes allowable discourse. And for me, when somebody comes onto one of my channels, and I'm just going to say it the way it is, and they attack me without engaging me in dialogue, I ban them immediately. So to me, that is a personal boundary issue that they have overstepped. And my understanding of how energy works and how to shepherd your energy has led me to strongly believe that that is unacceptable, and I can't allow it out of self-love to go on. So I know when to extract myself from a situation. I don't lash out necessarily. I try not to anyway. In fact, I almost never do. There's a lot of time that I've spent biting my tongue, let's put it that way. But I don't necessarily engage with those people. In fact, that's something I've done less and less over the years as I've understood the nature of personal power and energy much better. So it's okay to not have interactions with people when that's not a safe place to be in. It's okay. It's completely okay. But you don't have to shame or name or attack or anything like that either. You can simply withdraw your consent to be in that conversation.
You talk about silence in Get Out of Here Alive. You have a great section about the power of being silent instead of engaging in what would otherwise be a toxic or problematic interaction. The way that you describe it is much better than the way I'm describing it.
Yeah, right. So one thing you can do is just to allow people to say whatever they want to say, right? And you can be silent and you can take the high road, and I do that occasionally when circumstances merit or warrant that. But by the same token, I'm not going to allow people to just smear my feed and my social media with a bunch of rot that negatively influences and does harm to other people who might benefit from my message. I'm just simply not going to do it, especially when there's no spirit of dialogue in that interaction. And this happens all the time. I just wrote some lyrics yesterday, and the song is called Drive By, and it's about a drive-by trolling.
Oh, jeez.
Wake up and there it is. It's like on your feed, just someone just taking a shot at you as they drive by, right? That happens all the time, right? So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
There's a lot of different angles of how, and sometimes people are doing it because they're dysregulated and they're all over the place for whatever reason. And sometimes they're doing it because somebody has an interest in people not being able to have reasoned, peaceful discourse in a particular space. And it causes stress for sure. And sometimes walking away from it is the only thing you can do.
I agree. And you don't necessarily want to wake up the next day wondering if that person is going to be looshing you yet again, right?
Yeah.
So in shepherding your own energy, it's okay to create boundaries. That's one of the things I write about in this book as well. This isn't about winning a popularity contest or allowing free speech to reign supreme on your platform. That's not what any of this is about. But, by the same token, I think it is very important to find intersections with people who want to have reasoned and productive conversations and interactions, even if we don't agree with each other. I think that is very important. So I'm quite open to that, but I draw the line at people taking my energy. So one of the ways we can understand what that means, or we can detect when that's happening, whether that's in a relationship or in a job or in a casual encounter, is you can do the energy reabsorption or absorption and reabsorption technique that I outline in Get Out of Here Alive. And you can do it on a daily basis. Every morning when you wake up, you can go back to the previous day and identify the places that you're still feeling hurt by or upset by, looshed by, scared by, and you can reabsorb the energy that you lost to those usually micro, but sometimes larger traumas, right? And you can take all of that back in and pack that into your body and reclaim it. And in so doing, you're doing a kind of inventory of the previous day, and that allows you to actually identify without any doubt whatsoever the people and situations that are taking your energy, because you are the only expert on that subject, and only you can feel and sense and see that happening. What hurts you might not hurt somebody else. This isn't a cookie cutter situation. This is you and your interaction with the world. So identifying those places is just as important as taking the energy back in, because it allows you to start making different decisions and creating different outcomes.
It's so interesting to me. We've touched on some of these subjects in past broadcasts too, and I really like how we can talk about these things in terms of platform creators needing to protect their energy and their personal power and their ability to do good in the world in the way that is most right for them, and we can talk about people participating in others' platforms where people can have their energy extracted from trolling. People can have their energy extracted from a platform that is pressing you and saying you have to believe this, and using bullying tactics to get people to get really stressed out and cling to that platform for dear life because they're being manipulated by the cortisol pump. Something good, but then something bad, and then something good, but then something bad, and just keep going.
I call it the whipsaw action. You're just being yo-yoed by that platform. It happens all the time. I mean, some people have even said, well, you have some very heavy, dark things that you say in your books. And I'm like, but do I spend a lot of my time there? Is that where my focus is? Can't you see that my focus is trying to uplift people out of all of that BS?
Well, I mean, gosh, when I've encountered people misinterpreting your work, I'm like, they didn't read very far, because Sol, you talk so much about unconditional love. You go on and on and on about unconditional love, and a lot of the the vast, all-encompassing torsion field of unconditional love, and you bring it back to these really life-honoring positive modalities over and over. And I'm like, well, some people are in a fragile place and they're scared, and they just haven't been able to process a lot of things. But all of us who have been able to really deepen into this material, we get to center in what actually really strengthens us in a positive, life-affirming way. And we're not wasting our energy on things that are extracting from us, that are draining us of our energy. Certainly there's a really big difference for me. There are really big energetic changes that I've experienced because I dip into your books and I read this piece over again and I read this piece over again, and it's just really, really helpful. So we're all in different places, but I'm really, really grateful for the journey that you're taking all of us on.
Oh, well, I'm just a part of the journey too, I mean, I'm learning as I go, definitely learning on the fly. I mean, I think when I was a younger writer, writing conscious healing, for example, I had maybe a slightly different understanding of unconditional love, or I hadn't lived enough in certain areas to know where I would draw the line. So, recently, in another set of lyrics, I was writing about unconditional love, and the lyrics go, I have a condition for my love, only one restriction, a self-love benediction. First, I do no harm to my own self with my one and only love.
I love those lyrics. Those are wonderful lyrics. I'll offer a resonant frame that I often use and we talk about in groups, is that to fail to self-love effectively is not loving the other person, because it would teach the other person to fail in recognizing what self-love is. And so it's not loving to love someone else at the expense of yourself.
Correct. I love that.
I love this whole conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's we're in great territory here because I think people get so tripped up by that. And if I could just bring one criticism to bear on a lot of the New Age movement over the last decades, it's that, the whole idea of unconditional love really tiptoes to the edge of martyrdom and goes into that quite a bit, and into very harming forms of altruism. And I find that most of the time these things don't even appear to be necessary, and they're very often associated with a kind of shadow ego. People wanting to play the martyr, show how good they are, how much like, I don't know, Christ they are, or whatever they might be doing, and with their own psychodrama that they're living out. But really, essentially what they're doing is just harming themselves and teaching others a bad lesson about how to go about living.
And I would like to highlight too, there's something that a lot of people may not realize, but at intersections of compounded hardship, if a person is not able to really center self-love first, if the person is not able to be in their body and be aware of what they need and act to meet those needs first, what happens, we see this all the time, is that those people are doing the martyrdom thing, doing the what they've been taught unconditional love is, and their bodies are being destroyed while they're caring for others. And then the influences around them that are these subtle programming influences from marketing, from social engineering, from professional environments, all kinds of things, they kind of filter in and they affect that person's behavior so that they end up really acting very directly, very harmfully toward the people they're caring for. And they don't even know that it's happening because they weren't caring well enough for themselves to know themselves. And so they end up perpetuating violence, and not like it's robotic even. And they were trying to unconditionally love the other person, but they were taught something distorted about unconditional love.
Yeah, and the other thing they're doing is by not cultivating their personal power, they're not able to change the nature of their behavior, whatever, if it's addictive, if it's self-destructive, whatever. They're not able to get out of the grips of that patterning. So there's definitely a kind of alchemical or shamanic lens that could be brought to bear on situations like that.
It's very powerful to just make little bits of progress deepening into this material. And it's really an amazing experience to have gotten to deepen into a lot of this material. I mean, I've been doing this it was 2020 or 2021 when I found your work originally. And to look back at that, and like, it's 2025, so this 4 or 5 years of me getting to absorb all of the different things that you've been sharing. There's so much to discover in there. And it's really, it's revitalizing to get to know more and more of the community of people who's also following your work and benefiting from it. It's a kind of community connectivity that is very, 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 very different from the cult context, for sure. And it's very self-healing in so many ways. So your book is coming out in 2 days. Get Out of Here Alive is going to be released on the 20th of March, 2025.
The spring equinox, or the fall equinox, depending on where you are.
Right. So people can still, they can still get a review copy until that date.
Yeah, for about the next 24 hours or a little bit longer than that.
Right. And it's very helpful if people will go and pre-order the book. I'm gonna get a short post up with this on Intuitive Public Radio on Substack, so we'll include the pre-order link so that people can support the reach of your book by pre-ordering it. I hope that doing that in the couple of days before release will also help you with that, because we want more people to be aware of this material.
Well, I really appreciate that. Right now, the book is it's the #1 new release in alchemy on Amazon in the U.S. anyway.
Great.
But that doesn't mean it's classified as a bestseller yet. So it would have to go to the top of a category to be a bestseller. And here's the thing: it would only take probably 15 or 20 book sales very fast coming together to boost it to the top of one of those categories, because it's already kind of high up the rankings. So it's actually not a very big task. I don't know if it's going to happen, because a lot of people have gotten their review copies, and I absolutely was thrilled about that. If you're out there listening and you have a review copy and you've reviewed it, you can leave your review on Amazon as of the 20th, and I would really appreciate it if you would consider just cutting and pasting the same review on Goodreads and on BookBub, goodreads.com and bookbub.com. Those are the two of the major repositories for reviews that help authors reach bigger audiences. So, and I wanted to just say to you, Megan, thank you so much for just having me on again, and also just being such a supporter. I am walking a kind of lonely path here, and sometimes I feel that I'm a lone voice crying in the wilderness, and you always remind me that I'm not, and that there are people who really get what I'm doing. And so I'm just deeply grateful for you and your network of people for supporting me with the kind of feedback you provide, but also just I believe energetically I can feel that coming from you and what you're associated with. So thank you so much.
I am really, really glad to help, and your work and knowing you interpersonally has really helped me a lot. The conversations that we've had and the media that we've gotten to create, and the impact that your books and your other work have had on me, the whole regenetics conversation, we're going to talk more about that. So yeah, it's a pleasure for me to get to delve into this. So I'm so glad that we can do it. And the more people who get to discover what's going on here, that's such a good feeling, because of how it's improved so many people's lives already. Like more is how I feel.
Yeah, right on. That's very, very exciting. I look forward to continuing my own exploration of these topics, and I'm doing some new writing. I've been going back and compiling a lot of notes from the interviews I've given over the past several months, and it's given me some ideas. You've given me some ideas of things that I could unpack a little bit more. And I also just wanted to give a shout out to there's KB and Jacqueline have been in the chat. Really providing some, and there was someone else I believe, but I missed the name. But thank you for being here and commenting. That means a lot to me.
It's amazing to get to put comments up on the screen. It makes me so excited when we can do that. We started broadcasting with like when we started broadcasting Intuitive Public TV, it was like nobody knew what was going on, and gradually we've had more and more people showing up for broadcasts. I'm really grateful for the community feel that comes around that, the anti-cult modality community feel, which is hard to find most places. When we're all looking at this work and we're talking about these subjects, like how amazing that is.
Awesome.
I get more comments that I can put up on the screen. I'm trying to get more of them here.
That's great. Yeah, I really haven't seen the chat feed, but I've seen some of those popping up on the screen. That's really cool. And please, everybody out there, do subscribe to Megan's Substack and YouTube. That would be great. I mean, we need to get her numbers up so that her reach increases.
Thank you, Sol. And thank you to everyone who subscribes. I'm really looking forward to more of these conversations, and I mean, we're going to do this again someday soon, is what I suspect. We have a number of different conversations that we've been planning to have. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I guess I'll wrap us up if we have to.
Yeah.
An hour and 15 minutes. Maybe it's time to do that. Thank you so much to everyone who has joined us today and everyone who is going to join us to watch the replay. Here's a few more comments because I just can't bear to close up without putting them on the screen. Thank you so much, KB. Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us, reality walking in this intuitive unknown on this Intuitive Public TV. Thank you, Sol, for this awesome experience, and we'll see y'all later.
Ciao.